Posted by u/Jogi. Teachers of Reddit, besides violence, or threats of it, what's the scariest thing you've seen a student do? I saw two first graders try to play pets by having one tie their scarf around the other's neck and use it like a leash to drag the other kid around. Me plus another adult had to run over because the girl with the scarf around her neck was starting to turn blue. That's the scariest part about working with little kids. They keep almost killing themselves or their peers and they never understand just how close to death they are. A 15-year-old student, on the first day of summer term, poured a bottle of white spirit over himself, another 2 bottles over his school blazer, set fire to the jacket and put it on. Sadly, the student died of shock and the school was closed for the rest of the week. The fact that he put the jacket on after he had lit it was the scariest thing about the whole tragic episode. Had a very unusual student who just seemed to be out of it. Not on drugs or anything, but just not altogether there. Anyway, he was doing really poorly in the class, and hung out afterwards to see if there was any way he could pass the course. I explained, gently, that it wasn't going to happen, as we had one assignment left, and he currently had a sub 20% average. He smiled, all with a 1,000-yard stare, and said, "Thank you," and left. The classroom had windows overlooking the quad area. I watched him walk down the sidewalk for a few yards and then just unleash a massive fuck into the sky, complete with arms spread out. Then he started to kick the shit out of his book bag. I hightailed it out of there. Once had an adult student I was tutoring to help with his writing skills. As these things go, I encouraged him to respond to a series of prompts that could be freewriting, but I made the mistake of calling it a journal, which, for some students, means they write down anything that comes to mind. He insisted that I read his journal, quite forcefully, and I said I would take it home and give him feedback later that week when we met again. Each entry talked about how he loved to cut out pictures of porn and paste to his walls. At night, they would talk to him. I later found out he was a sex offender. Not a teacher at the time, but in college. One student got a bad grade on an assignment and ran out of the building into a tiny backyard area. He took out a gigantic knife and just started stabbing the ground over and over again. I watched from the second floor patio as students gathered in a circle around him to watch. I never saw him again. This was at a high school for teens who had diagnoses of mental health issues. So all the kids were used to getting lots of therapy and sharing issues. The kids had some problems and it was a super supportive school. One Tuesday, we came to discover that a sophomore sent her term art project to her teacher saying she thought it turned out pretty well, then she hung herself. No note, nothing. Not an accident. She sent her homework to her teacher and then killed herself. Nobody knew why and it is still the saddest and scariest thing. You never know. You just never know. Kids don't always talk. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school I had a history teacher who was super cool but she was really young as she was a recent college graduate. I think she was like 24, 25. She was really attractive too. She would always come in like an hour or two early to get paperwork and grading done. Once some of the students figured this out, there were multiple times that boys would stand outside her doorway and jerk off to her. They had to start having security in her hallway. Worked with elementary school aged kids for years. The scariest ones aren't the kids actually being violent or threatening. It's the few I came across that had honest sociopathic tendencies, and were smart enough to hide their actions and put on a good face. The ones I'm thinking of enjoy hurting others and getting away with it. But that's not the scary part really. Kids are still developing and they aren't good at being deceitful. It's the ones who you see learning how to be better liars and better at hiding their cruelty. The ones you see getting better at faking empathy. You get to see that lovely little horrible development and can't stop it no matter what approach. Some people just simply don't have that core kernel of decency even the brattiest kid still possesses. At the end of the day they simply don't care about anyone else and you can't change that. I guess those kids didn't really scare me, but what they will inevitably become does. I was in the class for this one. Chemistry and we are investigating an unknown liquid supplied by the teacher. Basically working our way down a list of tests to try to figure out what this stuff is. Teacher is wandering around giving advice and comments on people's results, come to this one group and asks which step are you on, gets the reply nitrating the unknown sir. Teacher goes white, turns out that there was a problem with a reagent used in the previous step which should have told them it was glycerin, but the test had not worked so the group was all unknowing titrating nitrating mix into a test tube of glycerin. They evacuated and called the bomb squad. Seemed overkill for a few ml of explosive no matter how brisson, but that is school administrators for you. I worked in a place as an art teacher and there was a child with severe autism that was not supposed to be in that facility I worked, since it was too difficult for him to adjust and he got frustrated with everything and everyone. I'm quite small-framed as a person and one time something minor happened, he lost a card he had found and became obsessed. Someone took it for himself. He was a relatively strong and tall child for his age and started having a panic attack. He punched us all plenty of times and pushed us even though we did our best to explain he would finally find it. His mother didn't pick up the phone and not only couldn't we continue with the class, but all the children were scared and we were honestly not knowing what to do to calm him down. It was pretty scary and I felt bad for this child. Not a teacher. In my high school the commons have super high ceilings, and the commons are open to students after school hours. Anyway, two kids were trying to flip a traffic cone in the middle of the commons. They repeatedly would toss the traffic cone up so it would spin then land on its base. Each time they succeeded they tried to toss it up higher. Long story short, they got a traffic cone lodged in the ceiling tiles of the commons. One time we were in class and suddenly the intruder alarm rings through the whole building. This is the alarm that means school shooter essentially. We all knew this wasn't a drill because they usually announce what days they're doing the drills on, so we were all freaked out. My class spent like 15 minutes huddled up in the corner of our dark classroom, begging for our lives, only to discover the alarm was pulled because a kid that went to our school was holding a collapsed umbrella that vaguely looked like a firearm. I know these aren't super scary but I thought that they were at least interesting. Not a teacher but there was this group of girls that manipulated boy in my kindergarten that had no friends and into laying in a suitcase and they closed it and walked around with it as he was screaming because he couldn't breathe in there. I remember this because I actually wrote an essay inspired by it in school. The theme was horror story. Some of the girls who did this to this boy were actually sitting in this class. They later told me that they could sleep at night because of it. I'm a first-year teacher. Before COVID I was teaching nursery students. The scariest thing was seeing the scratches, welts, and bruises on one of my 4-year-olds. When he warmed up to me he would tell me "Mommy hit me." I live in SE Asia, and other than making school a safe place, there was nothing we could do. He is tiny and harmless. His mother is a beautiful, well-dressed, wealthy monster. It breaks my heart thinking about him being stuck at home with her. Not a teacher, but I went to elementary school with a very intelligent and disturbed individual. I remember he lost his absolute mind when he failed to get an A+ on his test. He got a B. He left out the front door by himself and they had to go get him. Then he started getting bullied by this disgusting kid. This kid had ringworm bad and he once inhaled a bunch of animals' crackers, which he later puked. He was gross. Well, he started bullying the intelligent A+ kid and one day smart kid couldn't take it anymore. I remember him yelling and then it happened. He grabbed a pencil and stabbed bully in the hand with it. It went right through the middle. All the way through. I happened to be close by and I saw it up close. It was disturbing. I can still see it clearly in my head. Never seen anything like it. Well, there was lots of screaming. I may have mentally blocked out blood. Then smart kid and bully disappeared after that. Never saw them again. I've been bullied, but I don't think I could ever go that far. Maybe if things got physical, but not to that extreme. Second story. Again, not a teacher but a student. This one occurred while I was in high school. This boy was also disturbed, but also creepy. Kind of waste since he was actually really handsome. If he was normal he could probably have any girl he wanted. Even overhead some guys tell him he probably could get with me if he stopped acting so creepy. Partly true. Well, I used to sit next to him in Jewish studies, went to Catholic school. No one wanted to sit next to him. Everyone was either creeped or scared of him. I kind of saw through that and thought it was just an act. Like he had moments of true normalcy at times. Then there was one moment I began to believe he was mentally disturbed. I remember playfully snatching a paper from him one day. I accidentally cut his finger in the act giving him a nice paper cut. I was apologetic. Felt terrible. He proceeded to call me a B and showed it to me squeezing the blood out of it. I told him not to call me that and ignored him for the rest of the class. Then I began hearing rumors about him following girls around and breathing creepily at them. I believed it. I had saw this behavior once before. Tried it on me. I laughed it off though. Well, he began stalking one girl regularly. The girl complained, but no one did anything. Then one day I heard a lot of noise in the hall. Turns out he did his creepy breathing behavior to the girl again I guess and she maced him. The whole hallway floor above us was full of mace and the other students that happened to be nearby had got second-handedly maced. I was so thankful I wasn't on that floor at that time. Also glad he hadn't done anything to me. She got suspended for the mace and he got expelled. Never saw him again either. Wouldn't be surprised if he turned out to be a sex offender. I do think he had some type of mental disorder though. This is related to violence. So we had a biter in my 2s and 3s preschool class. Not unusual, I would say like 20% of the class bites at some point. Usually not very hard. And it's usually the 1s and 2s that do it. Mostly it's either rough play or out of fear. So this kid, we'll call him Damien. He bite a lot of his class. More than any biter that I've ever seen. He started by doing it in the open. Then he'd target kids on the playground when they were out of our line of sight. Then when he was banned from going in the playhouses, only place out of sight, he started to be more selective both about his biting and his victims. He targeted one girl who was just very friendly. He knew which teachers were more attentive on the playground and classroom than I was. He'd wait until I would take one of my students to the bathroom. But she tattled on him after the second time it happened. No, it didn't happen all on the same day, and while the parents noticed, she said it was a game. She in fact also bit Damien, but far, far lighter. So now Damien wasn't allowed to be alone at any point. But again, other teachers were terrible at watching him. So he targets this other kid, we'll call him Saul. Saul was practically nonverbal and very compliant. Damien scared him into being alone with him, and Damien would bit him low on the stomach, the sides, high on the legs and arms. Since Saul was already potty trained, he would sit on the toilet and his shirt covered the bites on his stomach. The bites on his legs were on the back so we didn't see them at all. We had no reason to take his shirt off, so we never saw the bites. We also never saw him alone with Damien, so no reason to suspect he was hurt. And of course, he never spoke up. The parents finally spoke to the director about it after 3 weeks and a dozen bites, many that broke the skin. Why didn't they speak up sooner? Well, they thought it was shameful. I have no idea why they didn't report us. Damien should have been kicked out well before this occurred. Saul, who speaks only to his parents, had confessed that it was Damien, when he was asked, and said that Damien threatened to hurt him worse if he said anything. Where a 3-year-old learned that kind of predatory behavior, I'll never know. TL, doctor, related to violence, but the scary part is we had a 3-year-old who systematically got better and better at terrorizing his classmates. He was taken away from his family by the state.